This is the Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara. We mustn't dwell. No, not today. We can't. Not on Rex Manning Day.
Oh, sorry. Pause. Music. Boop, 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 boop. Rex Manning Day? Gosh, I feel like this is one that maybe I've seen.
I thought maybe you guys would get this one.
Is it Mean Girls?
No.
Wait, no,
Can you give us a hint?
I feel like I always do this. Wait, I know it, and then
I know,
my
and
brain can't
I
find
know
it.
that I don't know.
I do know. No, Rex Manning Day is.
Say no more money, more.
No, I don't know it. Then what? Can you another hint?
It stars Liv Tyler.
Oh, is it?
It's
oh,
Empire Records.
Yes, Empire Records.
Okay.
Yes.
So 1995 coming of age comedy drama.
Okay.
Liv Tyler, Renee Zellweger, Ethan Embry, Maxwell Caulfield is Rex Manning, and Robin Tunney from The Craft is also in it.
I'm so happy when she has like a career item.
Yeah.
That wasn't The Craft. She was so good.
But I picked that one because that popped into my brain this morning when I was getting ready for you guys to come over.
Aww.
I was like, we mustn't dwell. Not today. Not on podcast recording day.
Oh, yay.
And just, lots of things from that movie live in my brain. Like, anytime anybody says, like, what's with whatever today? I'd think, what's with today? Just lots of dumb stuff.
Do you think, okay.
Yeah.
If someone watched it in their like decade of life and didn't see it in 1995, would it be okay?
I like when I was thinking about that, like, do I think it would hold up today? I think it's probably very of its time, but I kind of think it would hold up today.
Do you think it would hold up to like younger people and older people, or just people who are like in our little micro exennial generation?
For sure, our generation, I think, but maybe the youngsters would enjoy it. I don't know.
So I saw it, but like it wasn't like a big thing for. I feel like it was around the same time as Reality Bites.
Oh, I loved
later.
that movie.
It was later than that, I think.
Okay.
Because but I also like I didn't see it when it came out. I think I saw it later.
Oh, really? Because
Yeah.
Reality Bites was like very like Gen X,
And I think Reality Bites was like a little like it was a kind of missed Reality Bites.
Yeah. See, and I think that's probably like the age difference between us is that like for me, like Empire Records was like, I remember being like, oh, that's kind of for the younger, like it's a little more optimistic and for the like younger people than me. This is the Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara. And I have been
Still am.
I have been and I still am Jen.
I'm Liz.
And I'm Summers.
And on today's episode, Summers is going to tell us about a mystery in Carpinteria.
I am. And I'm so tired already.
That's our new tagline. I'm tired.
I'm
This
tired.
is the Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara, and we're so tired.
So this is The Choir Girl and the Strangler, and it is the unsolved murder of Margaret Senteney, a Carpinteria mystery.
Ooh.
Today I want to tell you about one of Santa Barbara's biggest unsolved murder mysteries, and it dates back to the early 1940s.
Okay.
This case has been a dark and shameful local secret for generations, casting a shadow over local law enforcement and the county's legal system. And I don't mean that it involved bad people in those systems, although it also did. Oh, no, it involved somebody bad in a state system, not local. But what I mean is it's been a source of frustration for the people in those government systems who wanted to see justice done in this case, and they just couldn't make it happen. And so it's a little frustrating. Okay. It's a case where everybody knew and knows who the murderer was, but nobody could touch him.
Oh.
And that's
Never
why
heard of this.
Yeah, I know, right? That's why the murder of Margaret Senteney is so interesting, though. It's a story that, as recently as 2014, was still weighing heavily on the people and institutions that couldn't get a conviction in the case. The fixation on this case even passed down to the son of a past Santa Barbara County district attorney. He wanted to see it finally resolved as a way to kind of honor his dad's memory. But it's somehow not well known overall now, but it was at the time. but it should be because it's an unfair and infuriating case, and a young woman got murdered by someone who got away with it. And it's also a lot like real life noir fiction. Like it's super like Humphrey Bogart, like investigating the case or whatever.
Uh-huh.
All right.
I just was like, I'm sitting in this recliner. And for the listeners at home, I'm currently wearing my pajamas, even though I am not, in fact, in my own home. But I am so comfortable. And you started talking, and I was like, oh, this sounds like a good story. I'm just going to close my eyes and take a nap while she tells it.
I need you to be funny.
I forgot I had to be a part of this.
Okay. This section is called Carpinteria, Safest Beach in the World.
But lots of sharks.
Carpinteria, the southernmost city in Santa Barbara County, gets called things like a sleepy little town nestled by the beach or a quaint seaside community a lot, which is a cliche, but also a little bit true. Carpinteria, or Carp, is cute and a little outdated looking, which I like. It had a population of just over 13,000 people in 2020.
Okay.
That seems like a lot.
Yeah, but it's like, UCSB has around 26,000 students. So it's like not even half.
What is its population of pot plants? Right? God, I hated it.
It's a
smells
quaint
like
little
pot.
city that smells like weed all the time now.
But that's recent. I don't want you to put that in your mental picture or your mental olfactory landscape.
Back in the 40s,
So
it
at
probably
the
didn't
time
smell
of
like
this
pot.
story, it was probably just a skunk.
It's more flowers.
Right. I literally cannot tell the difference between weed and skunks. And so I smell them in our apartment a lot, but it's our neighbor smoking weed. I also want to be sure to acknowledge that Carpinteria was originally a Chumash village.
Yep.
Before this area was colonized by Europeans. In the early 1940s, Carpinteria was a collection of coastal neighborhoods with a tiny town vibe. There were just around 2,000 people.
Wow.
In Carpinteria back then, and it wasn't a city yet. It was just an area of unincorporated county land, which is important to know because unincorporated areas like that are under the jurisdiction of the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department when it comes to crime. Carp was and is a surf town, and during the 20th century, Carp developed a snappy little marketing slogan to attract visitors and new residents. Carpinteria, the safest beach in the world, which is so bland and sweet. And oh my gosh.
I love that they could just deem themselves that and nobody is fact checking before they go.
I know. They're like, the internet isn't here yet. It's fine.
Says who? I know.
Yeah.
What's the
World's
criteria?
safest beach.
The community there at that time was friendly and people knew and trusted their neighbors. But then in August of 1942, the tight-knit little town was struck by the kind of brutal crime that shocks people so severely it changes the culture of a place a little bit. And this is where we meet Margaret Josephine Senteney. Margaret was born on February 25th, 1922, to George and Olive Senteney. Olive's maiden name was Pitzer, and I was so excited to have a woman's full name finally. So that's why I'm including it. It's not that important. I don't know. It was just nice to have too much information about a woman in a story for once. George, Margaret's dad, was a World War I veteran, and he was born in Santa Barbara, while Olive Pitzer was from Ohio. The Senteneys lived on Foothill Road in Carpinteria in the 1930s, and they were a big family. The U.S. Census from 1930 lists 9 people in their household. Dad, George, Mom, Olive, and 7 children. 3 boys and 4 girls, all born by the time Olive was 38 years old.
That's too many kids.
I know. It's
Yeah.
I guess it's not too unusual for back then, but it made me feel so overwhelmed to see that. I was like, oh, honey.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's like
man.
this when you see those stickers on people's cars with all the little kids, and somebody writes in the dust stay off her.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I have nothing against big families. Just not for me.
Yeah, not for me either. George and his older sons were listed in the census as laborers, and later on George worked as a custodian to support his family. By 1940, the Senteney household was much smaller as the older children had moved out. Margaret and her sister Ethel, who was just 1 year older than Margaret, I know, were still at home with their parents in 1940. By 1942, when Margaret was 20 years old, she was the only one of her siblings left at home with mom and dad. And it's wartime then. It is the same year as the Goleta Elwood.
Oh,
It's the same year
is the shelling
as the
L word.
the Elwood bombardment,
Uh-huh.
and the Battle of Los Angeles as well.
That's right.
it's wartime, so there are all kinds of things going on. Like, you know, you had to have blackout curtains drawn after a certain time at night.
Gosh.
And Margaret is the only one there to help her parents with all the new war efforts. In a 2014 Santa Barbara Independent article, Barney...
Was she eating? Was she clearing her plate every night to help with the war effort?
Probably. A 2014 Santa Barbara Independent article describes Margaret as a quiet girl who sang in the church choir and not one to run off to a party or with a boyfriend. I could only find a couple of photos of Margaret online, but those photos and quite a few others relevant to this case are on our Instagram and our other social media account, which you can find at Ghoul's Guide to SB. The photos of Margaret are in black and white, but the May 1951 issue of Daring Detective magazine mentioned repeatedly she was a redhead.
Oh.
Margaret had graduated from Carpinteria Union High School 2 years before, and in 1942 she had a part-time job as a companion for an elderly friend.
Oh.
Which I think is very sweet.
It is.
She would stay overnight at the friend's house to make sure she was okay. In just a month, though, Margaret was due to start a new job as a teacher. Margaret left home on the night of August 28th, 1942, which was a Friday night, to head to her job, which was close by. It should have been an ordinary night for Margaret, but an hour later, the friend who employed her called her parents at home and asked, "Where's Peggy?"
Oh, no.
According to Daring Detective, Margaret's dad said he'd go find her, and he started walking her route to work. And he went in the drugstore to see if she was there, and when he arrived at the elderly friend's house, the two set out together to walk the neighborhood looking for Margaret. So I think the friend was probably not that elderly, but
Yeah.
Margaret is how old at this time?
20.
20.
And now we have Jack Ross, officer in charge of the case. The Santa Barbara County Sheriff in 1942 was named James Ross, and his son John, or Jack Ross, was undersheriff.
I've never understood that.
I know.
But go on.
And then sometimes people are just named Jack, and it's like,
Yes.
oh, okay.
Sorry.
Undersheriff just means a deputy, but often it's like the top deputy, like the one who would act if the sheriff wasn't around.
Okay.
So right under the sheriff.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. But sometimes it's not. So that's who Jack Ross was, second in command to his sheriff dad. Jack was the officer tasked with finding Margaret when her disappearance was reported. And her parents, there wasn't any of that, like, do we have to wait 24 hours or whatever? Like, her dad got home and was like, she is missing.
Yeah.
And she never goes anywhere. So we need your help. Like, she does not have boyfriends.
Aw.
And like, whatever. So Jack was the officer tasked with finding Margaret when her disappearance was reported. And as I said, they reported it right away. Partly because of that description we just heard of her. She was not a partier. She didn't have a boyfriend anybody knew about. And Jack sent out radio and teletype bulletins to every place he could think of in the area.
What's teletype?
Yeah, I have this like, I have a note. What the hell is a teletype
thank you.
bulletin? Do you want to know?
Yes.
Okay. Here's your trivia tangent.
Oh, boy.
I'm picturing like a newsroom, like.
That's basically what it is.
Is it?
Teletype machines were like mechanical printers or typewriters that automatically typed up whatever data you communicated over, like whatever form of communication, like a telegraph line or a phone line. The first teletype, or TTY machines, which were also called teleprinters, worked over telegraph lines.
Okay.
They were invented so telegraph operators didn't have to sit there and like be like, hey.
Oh, got it.
Like,
Okay. I'm picturing like a little strip of paper.
I
I don't know.
Yeah, that's what
I think
like reading
those were probably the
I
very
think
first
that's a
ones.
ticker tape.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's like a description of what is produced as the ticker tape. But like, I think probably teleprinters did look like that at first. But I think by this time it was that stupid like dot matrix like paper with the holes on the side.
Yes.
In the 1940s, teletype machines usually typed out communications sent as sound data over telephone lines. So like kind of like a modem, but it printed to paper. And they used a system known as telegraphy or teleprinter exchange to transmit messages over long distances.
Cool.
And it was important. It was like basically like, you know, the equivalent of having a fax or something. Like, and it was great for law enforcement because they could get messages to each other quickly and very efficiently. It was an early form of electronic communication predating the internet and all of our modern digital messaging systems. So the point is Jack Ross's department had some useful technology that let them get information and send it quickly. They didn't have a whole lot of manpower. I couldn't find numbers on how many staff members they had, but it would have been great if, figuratively speaking, the calls hadn't been coming from pretty close to inside the house.
Oh, no.
And that is foreshadowing. Jack felt like he needed some backup to help him find Margaret, and it needed to be backup he trusted. Jack Ross felt like he needed some backup to help him find Margaret, and it needed to be backup he trusted. A thorough search hadn't helped find any evidence of where she was, and lots of local people, including 40 local Boy Scouts, wanted to participate in further search parties, which was great, but also increased the burden of workload and coordination on Jack's team. So Jack asked a California Highway Patrol, CHP, officer, Leonard Kirks, to help him. Kirks lived right there in Carpinteria, and he knew the town really well.
He was like, hey, how about you just handle the Boy Scouts?
Right.
I'm going to put you in charge of volunteers.
Managing all the kids.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, it's not super unusual. Like, all the local law enforcement agencies in Santa Barbara County, including CHP, work together on emergency response.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual. But Leonard Kirks wasn't brought in because of any expertise he had. He had never helped investigate a murder, and he'd never been present at a crime scene as an investigator. He was a traffic cop. Leonard Kirks was brought in because he and Jack Ross were friends. But he did have a few qualifications that made him seem like a great choice to bring in on the case. He was like well thought of. He knew Carp, that kind of thing.
Is he the bad guy?
Shh. So we know Leonard Kirks was a CHP officer and that he was inexperienced in detective work or crime scene processing. And we know he knew Carp well, but what else did we know about him? He was born in Texas in 1906. So at this time, he's 36 years old. About the same age as his friend, Jack Ross. He had gone to college. He was married to a local woman, Evelyn, and he and Evelyn lived with Evelyn's father, Letzi Beckstead, which is a great name.
Letzi Beckstead?
In Carp. And they lived on sort of agricultural land that Beckstead owned. Leonard and Evelyn had a 6-year-old son. Leonard was described as a handsome, strapping man who knew everyone in Carpinteria, according to a 2007 issue of Carpinteria magazine. And he was also a helper in Boy Scout activities and a member of the Lions Club. So he would have been perfect, Jen, for the...
Perfect to manage the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. The Carpinteria magazine article, the wording that they use is almost directly lifted out of a 1951 Time article. So I'm going to read you the Time article part of that. It was odd how clumsy a first-rate state highway cop could be when it came to investigating a murder. Kirks, a handsome, strapping fellow, knew everybody in Carpinteria where his father had been pastor of the community church. Patrolman Kirks was himself a good churchman, the father of a 6-year-old youngster, a helper in Boy Scout activities, and member of the Lions Club. He was pretty bright, too. A Vanderbilt University graduate, letterman in football and basketball. Who cares? But the Time thought it was good.
This is like, this is not a unique situation where you have like nepotism and like people that participate in socially acceptable sporting things. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume these guys are all white. And I feel like, yeah.
Yeah. Time continues. He had been top man in his examination for the California State Highway Patrol. The next day, while more search parties formed and scoured Carp, Margaret's body was discovered in the hills of Toro Canyon on a remote road on a property owned by Leopold Stokowski. Toro Canyon is a little north of Carp.
Wait, isn't there a famous composer, or is that Leopold?
I'm gonna get there. Okay. It's in a wealthy area, and Leopold Stokowski was a wealthy man. So he didn't find Margaret, but his caretaker did. Leopold Stokowski was a famous conductor.
Oh,
he's in his 60s in 1942. And I really wanted to trick you into thinking he killed Margaret, but he didn't. He just owned some land with a rarely used sort of isolated dirt road on it that the killer found useful for dumping a body next to. And other fun fact, Leopold...
Oh, go ahead. You might be saying this.
Leopold Stokowski was married to Gloria Vanderbilt and had children with her before she married Anderson Cooper's dad.
Oh.
He is the conductor, I believe, in Fantasia.
That's awesome.
Because he's featured in the, they show him walk out. And...
Oh, really? Gosh, I can't remember that movie.
When she was found, Margaret was dressed in a red floral patterned gown, and it was clear right away that she had been strangled to death.
Gown?
Oh.
It said gown. I think it just meant dress.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I was like, wait, she wasn't going anywhere fancy, right?
I think that the implication is she wouldn't have been wearing a red dress to work anyway. So like she wasn't going to work.
Huh.
Like she was dressed a little fancy. Not like ball gown fancy, but like she was like dressed for a nice date, I think.
Okay.
There were ligature marks on her neck, which one newspaper article reported as wire marks.
Oh.
Margaret had been beaten and her skull was split open, but investigators later determined those injuries had happened after she died.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, that's gruesome.
Mm-hmm. Her neck was broken by the strangling.
Oh, my gosh.
Which, that's violent.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like overkill.
Yeah, literally. A few items of Margaret's clothing were missing. One shoe, her tweed coat that people thought she was wearing at the time, and her purse. And these items were never found.
Whoa.
But wait, it gets worse.
Oh, no.
When he got to the scene, Jack Ross noted a set of footprints near Margaret's body, and it looked to him like the person who left the footprints was a decently large man. Mm-hmm. And there were tire tracks that had a distinctive squeegee pattern, is what it was called in like every source, which of course Ross noted, and in particular he was glad to see that the tire tracks had that unusual sort of print. And no place else said this, but Daring Detective magazine, which I bought a copy of the 1951 issue that talks about her murder. It's called The Case of the Strangled Choir Girl, and we will have photos of the magazine pages on our website at ghoulsguidetosb.com and on our social media at ghoulsguidetosb. Okay, in Daring Detective, it says that the tire marks were significant because 3 of the tires were the same and 1 was different.
Oh, that's a good clue.
Right? So Jack Ross notes these 2 key pieces of evidence, the footprints and the tire tracks. Mm-hmm. And he's like excited that the tire tracks had an unusual sort of print. So I looked into tire tracks. You can tell a lot from them. And they're more complicated than I knew of. It's not like where you just like roll a cookie cutter like thing and then match it to the tires all the time. I mean, that's what you want. Also, you want to identify a particular car. Yeah. But the way you drive affects how your tire pattern looks. And so I found a website that teaches you how to determine how a car was being driven just by looking at the tire prints. I didn't really understand the science of it all, but in general, tire tracks can tell investigators things about how a crime or accident occurred. It's not just matching up to identify the car. So it could tell them a little bit more about the scene. But that's enough about tire tracks. Back to Toro Canyon and our crime scene. Jack Ross, we know, is an undersheriff and his dad is a sheriff. So Jack knows some things about sheriffing. So nepotism, yes, but it was more, I think, like the Rosses were in the business of being sheriff and Jack was a good lawman or whatever. He was from years and years before. There are photos of him like with an enormous like drug bust thing or whatever, you know, or like guns that he seized. And so he was good at his job mostly.
I think it's really common in like policing, especially to just have like family legacy of
totally.
He leaves his buddy Leonard Kirk's CHP officer at the scene to safeguard these crucial pieces of evidence, the footprints and the distinctive tire patterns in the dirt, while he goes to fetch some experts to document the evidence. So when there is a body found or there's a death where foul play is suspected, that's one of several occurrences that requires you to tell the coroner as soon as you know when you're an officer. And so some sources said that Jack left the scene like in his car to go get the coroner, but he didn't. He just went to his car, which is a little ways away because Leonard suggested parking it a little ways away so it didn't get scratched up by the brush around the little tiny road. And he just radioed. He needed to get the coroner there, who was legally necessary, and a technician to process the evidence, which basically meant take photos of it. And like, I mean, this was the times when like you couldn't even really take color photos unless there was a lot of light. Like it wasn't high tech. And Jack gives Leonard instructions to not mess up those specific pieces of evidence.
Wait, does he mess them up?
Oh yeah. So when Jack gets back from his car where he'd radioed, guess who was wandering around scuffing out all the footprints at the crime scene? Leonard freaking Kirks.
Not Leopold Stetkowski.
No. He probably didn't even know at that point. He was probably like busy with Fantasia or whatever. I don't know when Fantasia came out. Jack was obviously like angry, but instead of sending Leonard home, he just decided like, oh, this is a good man who messed up, and blamed his inexperience because he'd never been on a crime scene before. And he was just like, stop doing that.
Oh my gosh.
So did Leonard stop? No.
No.
He walked over to the distinctive squeegee pattern tire tracks and stepped on them. And, like just right in front of Jack. And as Jack's experts investigate this crime scene, they discover unusual marks on Margaret's leg and foot. And they realize, like, okay, at the time, in the cars of around that time, your trunk wasn't like carpeted or whatever. It was just like this metal compartment, and then it had a rubber mat, like a corrugated type rubber mat. And so they think like, oh, the stuff on her leg is like in sort of stripes, so it's probably from the mat in a trunk, and she was probably brought here in this car that we now know not a lot about because Leonard has stepped on all of the evidence.
Yeah.
And so they start to wonder if she was killed somewhere else and moved to the Stokowski estate. And Jack Ross, who is not an idiot, later he was sheriff after his dad retired, by the way. Jack does eventually realize his friend Leonard wasn't just being hapless and clumsy when he tampered with the evidence. And Jack is going to turn on Leonard once his suspicions solidify. But his suspicions do take kind of a long time to solidify. And there are maybe reasons for that, but it took years. And we don't know exactly when Jack figured it out. But he probably started thinking it at this point.
Yeah.
Although a 1951 article in Time says the two of them worked together on the Senteney murder until they ran out of hunches. So then...
Or came up with a very strong one that you didn't really want to go down.
Oh, man. That same article in Time continues. Then one night, Under Sheriff Ross's telephone rang. A scared and breathless Carpinteria liquor dealer had something to tell him. It was a cop that did the murder. I know which one. It was Leonard Kirks. Kirks had bought a pint of whiskey and 2 Cokes from him on the afternoon of the day Margaret disappeared. On the 4th day after the body was found, he comes back to my store, the liquor man went on. He walks up and down.
He's like, here's one of those Cokes back. Turned out I didn't need it.
No.
He walks up and down, nervous as a cat, while I'm serving the other customer. Then when the other guy's gone out, Kirk said that the tracks near the body look just like the tread of his car tires. So he needs an alibi, and he tries to get me to say I sold him the liquor at 7:30 on the night of the murder. That isn't true.
This guy's the worst at alibis.
Okay, hold on to your butt, because it's going to continue in that way. Then, according to Time, Jack Ross kept the news under his tan Stetson and went to work. In the following days, Jack found out that Leonard had been sort of attempting to convince more people that he'd definitely been in certain places around town at key times.
Freaking dummy. Okay, sorry, go on.
I love a good thing where like someone confides in someone and then that person immediately is like, hey, yo, cops. So
I know. I wish I could do like an old timey accent, like, and I just can't. But
yes, sir.
So please just like imagine one in not Jen's, but a different one. Like he was possibly trying to establish alibis. Then a tip from the public came in. A gray sedan, possibly a 1939 model, had been spotted near the remote site the day after Margaret disappeared. Guess who owned a similar car?
Kirk's.
Yeah, Leonard Kirks.
Oh, man.
What a surprise. And it turned out that Leonard was, the same day that Margaret's body was found, having his car painted green.
Oh, what?
Later the day, including the interior of the trunk.
This guy is the stupid worst. Go on.
Our tagline should be, these people are the worst at murder.
I know. He's not even sending his best person.
Oh, my gosh.
And Leonard said he didn't have his trunk floor mat anymore.
Oh.
Because he randomly gave it away to a charity drive.
I am just already angry because this is apparently unsolved, which means this dummy never gets in trouble for it. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
So
I'm
the
mad.
charity drive does make sense because of the war. There were like a lot of like, give us all your junk stuff.
Please.
Wasn't it metal though?
You guys, if we're ever going to defeat the Germans, we're going to need all your trunk mats. Yeah.
I mean, they're rubber. I get it. You can melt it down and use it again, but I don't know.
I'm mad.
We're going to storm the beaches with
maybe they made
rubber mats.
Made the boats out of it. Weren't they inflatable boats?
You sewed a bunch of rubber trunk mats
Well, you
together.
melt them and you inflate them and make them.
Oh my God.
I know I'm supposed to yes and you, but that does make sense. Yeah, collecting items for the war effort. At this point, the working theory became that Leonard Kirks might have killed Margaret.
Oh my God. You think?
You guys, I'm beginning to think that maybe Leonard was
The
involved.
guy who painted his car, got rid of his trunk mat,
I know.
looking for alibis.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a lot. So, at this point, the working theory became that Leonard Kirk might have killed Margaret when she resisted his advances
Oh.
and threatened to reveal his secrets to his wife.
What was his secrets? Oh, that he was dating around.
Yeah, I think. And that Leonard and Margaret met because she was his son's babysitter. So he knew her.
Uh-huh.
But Jack did know that he knew her, and he saw that as a plus because Jack didn't know her and only had like one of the couple photos. And it was like, if Leonard sees her, he'll be like, hey, Peggy.
Yeah.
Nobody was like, oh, hey, wait, she was his son's babysitter.
Nope, they were not. No,
Gosh.
because it was like the honorable, like,
Yep.
dude thing. And I didn't put this into the story, but there was a like a USO or something center in Carp that Margaret volunteered at sometimes. And so like there were a lot of military men there, young military men. And one of them had been talking to her. And so like they did investigate that guy,
Oh.
but you can't find his name anywhere. Daring detective gives him a fake name. Like they all just totally protect it because he was an honorable man and he didn't do it and whatever.
Right.
And like even his commanding officers were like, well, we think he's like a good Boy Scout kind of guy or whatever. And like just totally protected him. But they did investigate it.
Their policing procedures at the time were, well, I asked him and he said he totally didn't do it.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy.
And he's a good guy.
Yeah. And like
So-
he had like a clergyman testify for him or whatever. And the clergy guy was like, I don't know how to say this, but he was boning a very different girl in Santa Barbara at the time.
Oh my gosh.
And like, that's not great, but he didn't kill anybody.
Yeah.
So the thing is, all Jack Ross had were these circumstantial bits of evidence, and they couldn't quite put them together and make any sort of charges stick.
We have all these puzzle pieces that clearly have the same picture on them.
Right. But it's just like, it's circumstantial evidence. You
Yeah.
can't convict
Can't
someone
put
on
them
that.
together.
Can't even charge them on it. So that's how it stays stalled for 8 years. But it was 1942, right? So Pearl Harbor had happened like the end of 1941 and all the, we talked about it in a different episode. Goleta in World War II. And so Jack and Leonard ended up both involved kind of in the war effort. Like Jack actually fought and Leonard like sort of legged it up to Alaska and volunteered with the Red Cross.
Huh.
I don't know what they were doing in Alaska, but I think he just wanted to be like out of town.
They were probably like collecting trunk mats
Right? Man.
for the war effort.
Yeah. So Jack was commended for his service in World War II.
I just imagine it's like a donation spot and everyone's just bringing in like things
Bodies.
that, things that are like slightly tied to murders. I have this knife set laying around.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, so the thing is that charity drive had happened a ways before. So like he clearly didn't give it to them. He clearly disposed of it, but he was like, oh, that, and then like by then they'd
I
already
see.
processed everything.
Dang.
Anyway.
That's like when I show up in something new and my husband and I'm like, oh no, I've had this
I've had
forever.
it for a while. Okay, so Jack did survive the war and he comes back to Santa Barbara and he comes back to his job as under sheriff in 1945. And the investigation sort of continues after World War II, but nothing moves forward until 1950, by which time Jack is sheriff. He started being sheriff in 1947.
Okay.
So Jack is more and more certain his friend Leonard killed Margaret, but like it's still such circumstantial evidence that he can't do much, but it's like his thing.
Yeah.
That it drives him, and he's decided, like, even though the whole like, I don't know, culture of like men being pals and hiding things
Bro
for each other.
code.
Yeah. Like Jack takes responsibility and he feels terrible about it, and he just like has to solve this case and make it move forward. But it's hard also because Leonard is a law enforcement officer and he's very well respected. His dad was pastor, like I said. Like, so they felt like they had to have like really good evidence to make it work.
He's like, he's CHP, I'm police. It's going to be a whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at the Golden State Killer.
Yeah, exactly.
He was in law enforcement, and how long did it take to get him?
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden, a Carpinteria woman complains to police that Leonard Kirks had an inappropriately sexual conversation with her 8-year-old son.
Oh.
And Leonard is arrested for child molestation.
Oh my gosh.
And Jack Ross sees his chance. And I don't know why. I think he was like, well, he's in custody. And so like maybe we can like break him.
Yeah.
Or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Squeeze him.
I should have done that in my old time. Yeah.
Make him sing.
See?
And at the same time, a friend of Margaret's decides to stand up for her. Dorothy Colleen Roseborough, married name Egan, was 17 at the time of the murder, and she steps forward with what everyone on the case sees as like their bombshell revelation. She says she saw Margaret getting into Leonard's car the night that she disappeared.
8 years later?
I was going to say.
Aw.
And I thought I'd hang on to that
Yeah,
for
right?
8 years.
Sorry, not to blame her.
No, I mean,
I mean, a little bit.
A
Just
little.
FYI, if you guys see me leave with someone and then later I'm murdered, don't wait 8 years.
I'm just going to call the police before you're murdered and be like, Jen is with this person. Like, yeah, I do that with my friends. Like, I have map locations shared with a whole mess of them. And like,
Well, we won't be unsolved murders because you can just look at texts. I've only been in an Uber once and I texted you guys immediately. I'm in an Uber. Here's what the guy looks like in case I die.
yeah. Time magazine quotes Dorothy's testimony very simply. It was Mr. Kirks's gray car, she said.
Yes.
So Leonard Kirks finally faces charges.
Wow.
And an auto repairmen give testimony too. One testifies that Leonard had asked him to falsify information about the absence of a mat in the back of his car to say it was already gone when he had worked on the car previously.
Yeah.
Another, Charles Boverson, who had since become a sheriff's deputy, says Leonard insisted on having the inside of the trunk compartment painted, like I said, despite it being entirely unnecessary and weird to do that. And he was like, people don't do that, dude. Like, and at some point it comes out that Leonard had used a pressurized air hose to clean out the trunk, like blow out all the, you know, any debris before
the evidence.
Yeah. And so his car, this murder happened in 1942. His car was a 1939. You don't need to get your car painted.
It's only a
that
few years
soon.
old. Yeah.
3 years later.
And like,
I just, my brain just keeps going like an Andor in What We Do in the Shadows. This fucking guy.
yes, that's who Leonard is. And then Time says another witness, an aged Italian truck farmer, swore to watching.
Oh, wait. We're gonna have to talk about truck farmer.
I know. I was like, did he grow trucks?
Yeah, that's.
I think it just means like, look, here he is here, and he's like in his truck.
This is my newest truck I grew.
I farm it. I think it just means he was like a really small farmer and he'd like hauled things
In his truck.
Anyway, there was farmland adjacent to Leonard's father-in-law, Letzi Beckstead's land. So farmers recognized Leonard and regularly saw him driving in and out of that area.
All right. So you said they lived on Foothill, and if I am remembering correctly,
No, sorry. They did live on Foothill, but then later they were on Olive, at the time of the murder.
Like down in town.
Yeah, and I don't know where Letzi Beckstead's land was.
Okay.
because Foothill runs kind of the back.
Yeah.
Along
all the way through. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This is just how my brain. Along the foothills.
Yeah.
At the base of the foothills.
Yeah.
And there's ag land in
Right.
the northern end of Carpinteria that butts up against that. So that's kind of in my brain where I'm picturing, because also the Lions
Lions Park?
Yeah.
Lions Park is back there also right off of Foothill.
Hopefully by the time we release this episode, I will have figured out where it is and put it on the map. But like, I don't know exactly where all
So
this
I'm
happened.
just like giving you an insight into how my brain is picturing visually this scenario playing out.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be there with you. So people regularly saw him drive in and out, and everybody knew him. So it was like, hey, there's Leonard.
Yeah.
with Margaret's friend as a surprise witness at the trial, which happened in 1951 because of the delay from the war, which made me think, like, how many murders just didn't get solved during the war and right after, you know, or like, I don't know.
Or how many murders didn't happen because all the men were off fighting in the war.
Yeah, maybe it evened out.
Huh.
And then how much domestic violence happened when they all came back.
Right.
With untreated PTSD.
Yeah. A lot. I think,
I'm sorry. You said you wanted me to be funny.
Well, my grandpa came back with PTSD, and then my grandparents got divorced immediately.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah. I mean, not immediately, but right after that.
Uh-huh. War is terrible.
I mean, I think just he was terrible anyway, but like, you know, yeah, I think it probably was a nightmare for a lot of women. With Margaret's friend as a surprise witness at the trial, which happened in 1951, a jury finds Leonard guilty.
Oh.
And sends him to prison for 5 years for second-degree murder. And I don't know why they went with second degree, so don't ask me. I don't have any idea.
How do you convict someone of second degree murder when the person was clearly violently strangled?
Right.
Don't know.
There's like the intent thing, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I could know because I could have read the whole case. It's online, but I did not have time. So
No, I just put that. I don't know. The wire around her neck for decoration.
Oh, gosh.
Or like, I see it as more like she provoked me or something.
Yeah, or like crime of passion.
Yep. Yeah. Wasn't planned ahead of time, and maybe like,
justice system.
He was a good man, and she sassed him or whatever. I don't know.
Well, she did say no to the sex.
Gosh, right? Ugh.
I mean, we don't know at all what happened. So like, Daring Detective says that there wasn't definite evidence of sex or like a sexual attack, but it was also like a magazine from the 50s, and no place else even mentioned like any evidence from the autopsy of her body, you know, except for like the murder. Because that was one of my questions when I wrote this at first. I was like, but was she raped?
Yeah.
But it was just, there was no definite evidence.
Gotcha.
So there was...
Or, I mean, just did it never get that far? Like, did he make advances and she said no, and then he got mad and killed her?
There was a lot of national press coverage for the case during the trial. And this photo feature in Life magazine has the weirdest pictures. We'll put them on the Instagram. There's really strange pictures of like Jack looming behind Leonard or whatever. And there's like this really strange note underneath one of the photos in the article saying that Jack hung out and joked around with Leonard in his cell during the trial. What? And that's really weird to me.
That is weird.
And I don't know what to make of that at all, but except maybe it was just like a cultural thing, like he's still my friend and like this isn't personal or whatever. Like we're still pals. I don't know. I mean,
maybe, I was going to say maybe he was like trying to still see if he could get him to like admit to something. But if at that point he had already been convicted and sentenced, then what's the point?
Yeah.
Weird.
No, it was during the trial that Jack was joking around with him in the cell. So I don't know. I think that was weird. And I don't know if I like Jack more or less for that. Like, I don't know. But in 1953, a new trial happens, and it's a roller coaster. They find out that Dorothy, the earlier surprise witness, had mental health issues, and she had been committed to Camarillo State Hospital in 1952 during her mental instability, it says. Her psychiatrist says that she suffers from delusions and hallucinations, and she had been declared mentally unstable in 1946. When she spent several months at Camarillo. And so at that time, that meant that she had no credibility anymore. But I just want to say, let's appreciate her anyway, because even if she was delusional, she thought that she saw that, and she stood up for her friend eventually, or she tried to.
Well, or she could have had some sort of, you know, post-war psychiatric break. Yeah. You know, like just because she was later found to be mentally unstable doesn't mean that she wasn't mentally stable at the time. Right.
So I think in the trial, the doctors were kind of like, well, she might have still had this back then. Like, we don't know. It could have been, but it was all the way back to 46, definitely. So Unfortunately, Dorothy's testimony harmed the case, and all the DA had left was the piecemeal circumstantial evidence from before, and that wasn't enough.
So did they like do a retrial because she was?
'Cause that was revealed. Yeah.
No.
Oh.
Leonard was pushing for a retrial, which is everyone at the time thought that that was like an unhinged thing for him because he only really needed to be in prison for 3 years on a 5-year sentence. He was at San Quentin. And so at the time that he gets the retrial, he really probably only has 1 year left.
Wow.
And the retrial made him vulnerable to getting the death penalty.
Huh.
So like it would have been a better bet.
Right.
Yeah.
Because then you're like, oh, now you can't double jeopardy me.
Yeah.
and try me
exactly.
again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the court is also not pleased to find out that the DA who had tried the first case, David, in some places, including the Independent, he's called David Liker. But in the court transcripts and every other source, it's Licker. And it makes me laugh. David S. Licker.
Either way.
David S. Licker.
Licker?
It's
either
so
way,
fun.
Either way, I just want to say, I
S. Licker?
hardly know her.
I know, right? They were not excited to find out that the DA had been telling people that he like knew Leonard Kirk definitely killed Margaret and everything. And so like, and then the judge had also like given some really weird non-standard instructions about circumstantial evidence to the jury.
In the second trial?
In the first
Oh, in the
trial.
first trial,
So
okay.
those were reasons to overturn it.
Got it.
The jury in Leonard's second murder trial only took 14 minutes to find him not guilty.
Dang.
Yeah, and so Time covered it again. There was like a lot more national press and whatever. Time like called their article sequel. And then, like, and yeah, they noted that it was a really big risk for Kirks to appeal, which I think people interpreted as like he must be telling the truth.
Yeah.
But also, like, I wonder, it seems to me, just kind of going off of what we already know, that he could have just, like, waited a year and then probably, like, gone back to being a CHP officer.
I don't know. I mean, hopefully the CHP wouldn't take back someone who had been convicted of second-degree murder, and maybe that's why.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Unless there's, like, something where in order to continue
Like having
being
a
in law
livelihood.
enforcement, he needed to be found not guilty.
In something that's very typical for our podcast, some sources said one thing and some said another thing about the interim between when Leonard came back from Alaska after the war and his first trial. Some say that he was a CHP officer that whole chunk of time, and some say he like became some sort of businessman or salesman or something. Or I don't know, truck farmer. I don't know what it was. I don't know. But there are different sources about that. So even though it was a big risk for Leonard to push for the second trial, he did, and he won, and he came home. Leonard Kirks lived out the rest of his life in Santa Barbara. He died in 1988, 46 years after Margaret's death. He was 82 years old, while Margaret only got to live to be 20.
Ugh.
No one else was ever charged with her murder.
Wow.
And the next little segment is called Carpinteria is having none of it. So the people of Carpinteria were not pleased with how all this went down. They didn't like it that Margaret's death was going to stay unsolved, and there have been a lot of rumors about what might really have happened to her and why. And as the years passed, rumors in Carp got more and more intense and dark. Some people believed that Margaret's murder was linked to a hidden underworld full of dark secrets and run by powerful people.
Oh, boy.
Was
The
Leonard
police.
Kirk's... Right. They thought maybe Leonard wasn't guilty, actually, and maybe he was just a pawn in a bigger game. There were also rumors of a roadhouse or bordello somewhere towards the eastern area of Carp. Stories of secret parties and like, I know, and like general grossness and secretive gatherings and a sex ring. And like, could Margaret have been involved in that?
Wow.
I feel like these are all such like, you know, like it's a pawn in a bigger scheme with all the powerful rich people. It's just like a hop, skip, and a jump to lizard people. And, like these are all the same conspiracy things that we see all the time.
And like the imagery of the murders reminds me of Twin Peaks with like where Audrey like crosses the border and goes to One-Eyed Jack's and like gets caught up in like the, you know, sex worker den or whatever. And it's an older reference, but it checks out. So I wouldn't have suspected that Carp had any of that going on.
Yeah.
Despite the weed smell now. But no answers. And weirdly enough, despite the fact that Margaret Senteney's murder remains officially unsolved, it's not a cold case.
Oh.
Sergeant Eric Rainey of the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department did once, according to Carpinteria magazine, I didn't talk to him, did once confirm that there's no cold case file. Wow. So I guess it's just unsolved, but they're not going to try anymore.
Because they're probably pretty sure Kirk's did it,
yeah,
right?
And like that's just my assumption as to what it means to have an unsolved trial that is not a cold case.
Yeah.
That it's just not open and they're not going to spend resources on it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we know who did it. We're just not going to.
Well, there's just nothing they can do about it.
Yeah. So that's almost it for the story, but not quite. I mentioned Barney Brandingham's 2014 opinion piece in the Independent earlier. And that little tiny article is what got me started on this. And it's so mysterious and fascinating. And it's not even really an article. Like I said, it's just like an opinion piece. Mm-hmm. Barney says that he knew about the Senteney case, but it wasn't like at the forefront of his mind because of something like he used to cover court cases at the county or something like early in his career as a reporter.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd totally forgotten about it. But then he ran into Barry Licker. Or Licker.
S. Licker.
Yep. Who was District Attorney David S. Licker or Licker's son. And Barry asked him to help find out what happened to Margaret because it was a case that had always bothered his dad. Mm-hmm. Barney did look into it and he remembered it had been an open secret that the Kirks case had been a major fumble and that like basically everyone knew Leonard Kirks was guilty, but they also knew they couldn't touch him. And so he started to look into it. And people like delivered him all these weird sources of information, like local history books that had small print runs and the issue of Daring Detective, which I bought a copy of, and then 2 other similar like pulp detective magazines that I couldn't find that covered Margaret's murder. And it's just like a tiny little short piece, but so interesting. And we'll link to that. Despite Barney bringing the case to light a few years ago in his opinion piece, that seems to be it for any recent movement on the case and any coverage and really any knowledge that it happened. Like we hadn't heard about it.
Yeah.
Which means that it was not well known. I don't know. Just so everyone that was involved is dead now. So what do you do?
Oh, that just sucks. Like for her family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To get no closure.
So that's it. That's my story, except I have a little bit of speculation about the coroner thing. So remember how Jack Ross had to leave the scene for a little bit to get the coroner because it was like a requirement that the coroner be notified or present to attend to Margaret's body or at least just know that there was like potentially a murder that had happened.
Well, because like a cop can't like declare a death, right?
Right. And so at least that I found, it wasn't necessarily that the coroner had to drop everything and go to the scene. He just had to know about it. And then like maybe he could send an employee or something for like time of death or whatever. But so I found out that when Jack Ross became sheriff in 1947, he took on not just the role of sheriff, but the role of sheriff coroner. Oh. He was the first sheriff coroner in Santa Barbara County's history. And that continues to exist. Bill Brown is currently sheriff coroner of Santa Barbara County. And I don't want our podcast to be one where I have to go talk to humans. So I did not call them and ask to talk about it. But I like to think that maybe Jack made that change intentionally. And maybe it had a little bit to do with what happened to Margaret and that she never got justice because if he was coroner, he would have been notified.
Right.
He would have had to
step
leave.
away. Yeah. Oh.
So like,
I thought that was just like a standard. Like if you were the sheriff, you were the guy.
I mean, it may
coroner.
have been.
Did it put coroners out of business?
Well, one, I guess.
Well, but there's like, funeral, undertaker, whatever you want.
Are there independent coroners?
Well, I mean, there are undertakers, but there aren't like the crime, like the law enforcement capacity independent coroners. No.
Yeah.
So
it's a ghost.
Maybe Jack decided to do something lasting about his mistake and do something so that future sheriffs wouldn't have to leave the scene to get the coroner necessarily so they could keep their eye on the crime scene and evidence couldn't be destroyed. I don't know if that's true, but I like that as a legacy for Jack and Margaret. And so on the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's website, it says Santa Barbara County has had a sheriff coroner. Santa Barbara County has had a sheriff coroner fulfilling the coroner's responsibility since 1947. Sheriff John Ross, because John, became the first Santa Barbara County Sheriff Coroner. So, I don't know. It's the first story where I've like been pleased with law enforcement.
Yeah.
Like I ended it with like, good for you, Jack.
Well, and also I feel like we've run into a lot of things where it's like no significant changes were made
Yes,
right.
to any policy or procedure after this happened. So
Yeah.
it is nice that they, you know, they felt like, oh, this one particular incident could have changed the entire outcome of this case.
Yeah.
How can we eliminate?
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I don't know if that's what they did, but I can't imagine that even if someone was like, hey, everybody's changing to sheriff coroner now, we should do it too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course,
Yeah.
Jack was going to think back to like, yeah, if I had been sheriff or like my dad had been, or I don't know, just like, yeah.
Also, the Jack and John thing, like, how does Peggy come from Margaret?
I don't know.
I didn't want to admit it earlier, but you said something like, "Where's Peggy?" And I had a moment where I went, "Wait, what? What? Did I black out? Am I listening to a different story?"
I know.
You're on a different podcast.
Yeah, man. Actually, I think that people don't know that Peggy is short for Margaret because a couple articles changed what her boss, not her boss, but the elderly lady said to like, "Where's Margaret?" or whatever instead of "Where's Peggy?"
Mags.
I know.
Where's Mags?
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that's it.
That's
Didn't we know?
terrible.
Why is Margs coming back in my? Is that short for Margaret? I don't know.
It is now.
I hate that there's like there's weird things that are short for other things that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
Dick and Rich.
Yep.
Anyway, that one, like, I got really, really into that case, obviously. And, like, I feel like I want to keep learning about it and, like, keep coming back to it because it just feels like, well, this is my case. Like, this is the one that I care about now. But unfortunately, there's just nothing really else to learn except about, like, deeper dives into what happened.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It just bothers me that it was, like, the law enforcement version of the one that got away, you know, for people for like decades.
Right.
So
I feel like the obvious question for the Magic 8 Ball would be,
Did Kirk's do it?
Leonard Kirk's murder?
I mean, he did
Margaret?
it, so I don't really want to do that one
Yeah.
because, like, I mean, allegedly he did it, but like, what if it says no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 8 Ball is fallible. Haven't we talked about that?
Yeah. But what about like, no, I just don't want to do the 8 Ball in murders.
Okay.
Can we not? Is that okay?
Unsolved
Yeah.
or unresolved.
Like Kim Morgan,
Yeah.
it bothered me.
Yeah, let's not do it. That's okay.
Unless we could talk about like, I don't know. Will it ever be solved or
that's a good
something? Or
one.
I don't know. Can we do that?
Yeah.
That
Sure.
work?
Will Margaret's family ever get
Closure? That's a good one.
Okay. Magic 8 Ball says,
You want to hand it to me?
It's so hard to read.
reply hazy, try again. Seems fitting.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah, right?
That's
Just
like,
gonna leave it at that.
They tried the trial
that could have
again.
been the verdict.
Yep.
Yes, definitely. Well, I don't know. I'd say it's still pretty hazy.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, boy.
Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks for the story, Summer.
And we're I don't know whether you want to say this or not, but like we have had a continuous upsweep of more listeners, so we just want to thank you all for joining in, and
Yes.
it pleases us a lot.
Yes.
Every little one.
Yeah.
We're just delighted. So
we
thanks.
say that like we would do this even if we were the only people listening, but it does make us happy to know you're out there. So.
Yeah. And it helps my daily dopamine hits to see our analytics growing and everything. It's really nice.
It's fun.
So,
keep
please
listening.
subscribe if
Yeah.
you haven't yet.
Subscribe, tell your friends. We love it.
Say hey on the socials.
Yeah.
Send us your stories.
We're lonely.
Yes, we would love to have stories from listeners those Santa Barbara peeps that
Yeah.
if you know of something, if you've heard a story,
you've
you'd
seen
love
a
for us to,
ghost.
if you've seen a ghost, if you work somewhere that's haunted,
If you are a ghost,
if you are a ghost
Send
and
us
you're
an email.
listening, if you can physically touch the keys,
I'm tired.
send us a ticker tape. Or wait, no, a ticker tape is the
A
noun.
teletype.
Send us a teletype. Hit us up on the 8-ball.
Thanks for listening to The Ghoul's Guide to Santa Barbara. Like and subscribe on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Ghoul's Guide to SB.
Our website is ghoulsguidetosb.com. Got a spooky story or know of a haunted or paranormal location in Santa Barbara? Send it to us at ghoulsguidetosb@gmail.com.